In 2009, I had the opportunity to share with you at your staff retreat at the beautiful Oak Valley. I've got a picture. I want to show it to you to remind you of where we were together. There we go. In 2009. And so it is a treat to invite you here in 2016 to speak again to your staff retreat at the new Dr. Billy Kim International Center at Belhaven University. It is significant as the staff of FEBC that you are here at this university because of this event and this building. But it's also important that you are here in Mississippi in your planning and staff retreat thinking about the future, because you are near one of the most important portions of America in the Mississippi River. It is a significant river that runs through our country, 3,700 kilometers, 3 times the length of the Korean Peninsula. The significance of the river, which is just a few miles from here, is that for the United States, that was the starting point of most of the significant journeys of advancement. The river begins in Minnesota, far north from here, and it runs all the way through the United States to New Orleans, which is the port. And in the development of this country, our founders began on Boston and New York beginning, but developed the center of the country out of New Orleans because of the Mississippi River. And so they would bring goods to export or goods to import to New Orleans, and then they would begin to come up the river. And they would come as far as a town called Natchez, Mississippi, which is not far from here. And they stopped at Natchez because that is as far as the boats could go in those days until the steam engine was invented in 1820. And on what's called the Natchez Trace, which is a trail that led from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, that's how the interior of this country advanced as they brought goods and people and livestock along that trail that went from Natchez, Mississippi, close to where you are, to the center of the country. And the Mississippi River was central to all that. It made Natchez one of the wealthiest places in America in the early part of the 1800s. Some of the most beautiful homes ever built in America were built in Natchez, Mississippi. And some of those are still standing today and can be visited. The river was the dividing line between the east coast of America and the new adventurous west coast between 1830 and 1870. Belhaven University was founded in 1883. But the people, as they advanced up the river, went from New Orleans and then established Natchez, and then went on to Memphis and finally to St. Louis. And it's out of St. Louis on the Mississippi River where the West was expanded. It was out of that western expansion in wagon trains that this country advanced and became established in such a vast territory out to California and Oregon. It never would have happened without the Mississippi River. And so the fact that you are here for your staff retreat at the site of this river, you understand it is a place of new beginnings, of new advancement. Now, the wagon train leaders in those days were men who had to have great vision for the future. They were always looking ahead. But everyone had to trust in the leader and where that leader was going. And without that trust with the leader, the wagon trains never would have advanced into new territory. But it took lots of different people to make a wagon train move into the west of the United States. It took those who could handle horses, those who could build wagons, those who were cooks, those who could tend the sick. It was an overwhelming trip. It was a trip of great rewards and great value for those who would persevere. And so it's somewhat like your staff retreat, in that you are beginning a new 60 years. But like the wagon trains from the Mississippi, you're advancing into new territory, not knowing exactly where God is leading. What FEBC does going into new territories, God will bless as you work together because of your love for Jesus and your commitment to the gospel. And so as you're planning that future together in this time on our campus, I want to share with you 4 challenges to consider in your discussions as you continue this evening after our banquet. The first is to find courage for your future by looking back. Second, find strength for your job by focusing on your calling. Third, find joy in your responsibility by depending on others. And fourth, find victory in your struggles by trusting God. Let me briefly talk about those 4 challenges to you. First, find courage in your future by looking back. The wagon trains were often overwhelming because the obstacles ahead were so significant. They had to cross rivers. They had to cross deserts. They had to go over mountains. They were attacked by Indian tribes. They were in a future of great uncertainty, and the obstacles ahead of them were overwhelming. And I'm sure for many in those wagon trains, they would look forward and were afraid of the future and where it might lead. They would look forward and be overwhelmed. As we say here in America, we would look forward and say, yikes, what's the future look like? Where's Chung Su? Chung Su, what's the best Korean translation for yikes?
I have no idea.
Yikes?
Sorry.
Yikes is the best translation for yikes. Okay. They would look forward and say, yikes, how can we make it forward? That's what Americans might say. And any organization in today's culture looks forward to an uncertain economy, to changing political pressures, to destabilization of our globe, to challenges against Christians, to difficulties we face, and we look forward and say, yikes. But the difference is that we need to also look back. Because when we look back as Christians, we see that we faced many of those same type challenges. We've had many of those same obstacles. We've had other times of financial challenge and overwhelming. We've had lots of those types of things. And when we look back, the trail where we've gone looks a lot like the obstacles ahead. But the difference as Christians is we can look back and say, wow, because we see where God led through the obstacles. And so although the trail before is overwhelming, we know God will also lead forward. So I encourage you to find courage for your future by looking back, not just looking ahead. This is somewhat the message of Belhaven University verse of the year for the year we're just beginning next week. It's Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Have courage for going forward. Be diligent in going forward. And you can do that by finding strength by looking back. The second challenge I would give to you is find strength for your job by focusing on your calling. The Wagon Train set out with great strength and determination to go forward. The Wagon Train knew where they wanted to go. They were excited about their future. They were determined in what they were doing. They were strong and faithful to be driven to go forward. But it wasn't long into the journey before they began to get hot and tired and overwhelmed, and conflicts came between them, and they got discouraged. And what happened was they lost their calling that set them out on the journey to begin with. The way we stay strong is to never lose sight of our calling, not just get caught up in the job that we have to handle. We never tire or give up when we are focused on our passion. We never give up when we are using our gifts. We do give up. We do get tired. We do get difficult when we forget our first love and focus on our job instead of our calling. FEBC staff, I encourage you, don't ever forget your first love. Why did you come with FEBC to begin with? Do you remember that excitement? Do you remember that joy you had the first day on this wonderful staff? Keep that calling fresh in your life so God will honor your work. And it is like we read in Revelation 2. I know your works, your labor, your patience, and that you cannot bear those who are evil. And you have tested those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars. You have persevered and have patience, and have labored for my name's sake, and have not become weary. Nevertheless, I have this against you, that you left your first love. Too often we can do our job in a Christian ministry and lose our first love of our calling that brings us to it. We have the energy to be faithful, the strength to go forward when we're focused on our first love of our calling rather than just our job. The third challenge I would have for you is to find joy in your responsibility by depending on others. The Wagon Train needed many people to be successful. Often hundreds of people in one wagon train. So many people had to work together for it all to work. And in Christian organizations, we need to remember we each have a responsibility that is critical if we're to be successful together. I would encourage you to remember God gave you your responsibility on purpose. Whatever you do for FEBC, Whether you are a leader or a broadcaster, or you handle the finances, or you help clean the buildings, whatever you do for FEBC is important because God asked you to do it. And if God gave you that job, God gave it to you on purpose. I would also suggest to you that what could you do for FEBC that no one else could do is something you need to always focus on. What is it that you can do? I've worked with you at your stations. I've seen the wonderful jobs you do. And there are expertise and there are gifts and there's commitment among your staff that each one of you is important because nobody else can do your job if you do it well. So don't lose sight of the joy of your responsibility because of the uniqueness of what you do. And focus on both your interconnectedness and your individual responsibility. You each have a task, but your task is also together. You cannot do it alone. And that's what we're reminded of in 1 Corinthians 12. God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. As part of an organization, we don't always understand the whole of where we're headed, and that makes it difficult at sometimes. But you have to lean on each other. You have to trust in each other. And you need to trust also in those who lead FEBC, that they know where you are going in the future. There needs to be loyalty to your leaders in that you don't understand all of the future, but you know that they can see some things you can't see. So in entrusting them and loyalty to them, God can honor what you do. There needs to be trust in each other, that you're working together for God's best, not just for your own best. Find joy in your responsibility by depending on others. And lastly, I would suggest to you, find victory in your struggles by trusting God. My favorite story in the Bible is the story of David and Goliath. 2 years ago, I preached a whole semester in our chapels on David and Goliath because the story is so important to me. And many people assume the point of the story of David and Goliath is that the little guy beat the big guy. But that is not the point of the story of David and Goliath. The point of the story of David and Goliath is Goliath never had a chance to win because God was on David's side. Amen. And God is on FEBC's side. Amen. So when the challenges come, when the difficulties come, when the giants seem big, God is on your side. Amen. And you will win. Amen. We have that story recorded for us in 1 Samuel 17. David said, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled, talking to Goliath. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, for the battle is the Lord's. Your battle is the Lord's. Your challenge is the Lord's. Your responsibility and all that you have to do, God is on your side and will make you successful because it honors Him. And that's what he wants for us. And people need to hear the love of Jesus communicated through FEBC. And here's my favorite part of the story of David and Goliath, a few verses down, when it says this: when the Philistine arose, when the Philistine came out to fight and Goliath came out to fighting, David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Don't run from the giants in your life. Run toward the giants in your life. And God is on your side, and he will see you through. God will give you courage. God will give you strength. Set out from this Mississippi River on a new adventure of what's ahead for FEBC, and God will be on your side to take you into new places you've never been before. And some down.